Why do I write books like this? I'm not supposed to write these books. As you heard, I'm the P. Lawrence of history and book study. My field is late medieval and early modern Europe, 1400 to 1700. My academic books, my scholarly books, take about 10 years apiece to write. The one I'm working on now I began in 1999. These books, this one took me 8 weeks to write. Waiting for Snow and Havana took me 3 months to write, about 11 weeks, 12 weeks. I was desperate. I didn't know how to awaken the American public or the world about the real situation in Cuba. I'll end with this. It's kind of an example of what it means to learn to die and to be reborn, and to sort of think of others beyond yourself. I could have made a complete fool of myself by writing these books. It's actually looked down at my profession. Everyone, all other scholars look down on people who write books without footnotes. It's just the wrong thing to do. It's terrible. It means you're not serious. Or even worse, it means you want to make money. So I once cashed a check for 2 of my scholarly books. 6 months royalties for 2 scholarly books that took me 10 years apiece to write. The check was for $17. This is totally wrong. Why did I do it? Well, I did it because in 1999 something very strange happened. A little boy showed up off the coast of Florida, Elian Gonzalez. Most of you were very little when this happened. You may not remember, but this boy was everywhere. You couldn't turn on the television. You couldn't open a newspaper. You couldn't read a magazine without reading about this boy. His mother had gotten on a raft with several other people to get this boy out of Cuba. Everyone drowned except for the boy. And then he went to live with his uncle and aunt in Miami. And suddenly the Cuban government began saying, no, that boy needs to be with his father back in Cuba, even though he had never really lived with his father. And I'm thinking, wait a minute, this is the same government that prevented my father from leaving. Because I never saw my father again. The last time I saw him was at the airport when I was 11. This is the same government that prevented my friend's father from leaving. I start counting the people I know whose fathers never showed up again. And the hypocrisy and the lying just got to me. So I wrote letters on my fancy jail stationery to every newspaper and magazine and network, saying you should add a little depth to the story. How about the airlift? How about 14,000 kids? How about the hundreds of thousands of kids later whose fathers were sent to do slave labor for years, separated from their families? I didn't get a single reply to any of my letters. Not one, not even an acknowledgement. So, I went crazy. You can ask anyone who was living with me at that time. I went absolutely nuts. And wrote Waiting for Snow. Because I knew a story, a narrative, first-person narrative, based on experience, would get the point across. That's why I wrote it. And it worked. That's the great miracle. It worked. It's been wonderful. I wrote it as if it were fiction, and that explains the passage that was read to you. Our lives improve when we become fiction. I wrote it as if I were writing a novel, and I actually sold it as a novel, but my editor was too scared to come after the fact that it was really my life story, and said, we can't publish this as fiction, publish it as nonfiction. And she was right about one thing. She told me, because I begged, oh, please let me take all the unpleasant stuff out. I don't want to look bad. And she said, the worse you look, the more ready people will be to believe the story. And she was absolutely right. And it worked. And not only did it get the National Book Award, but it's woken up a lot of people about what happened in Cuba and what continues to happen in Cuba. So now I'm winding up to a close, and then I'll open it up for questions. So here's my dilemma at this point in my life, is that these books reach a wide audience. You even have colleges that force an entire class to read your book. That doesn't happen with the scholarly books. I never received a thank you for any of my scholarly work. Scholars don't thank each other, they just criticize each other. Hey, you missed this. You got the wrong date. Stuff like that. If my scholarly books take about 10 years to write, and I'm 60 years old, how many more books do I have left to write? Well, not many. Even if I live to be 90, not many. Now, these books are not only easy to write, they're fun to write. I have never had so much fun in my life as when I was writing these books. It doesn't even count as fun. It's beyond fun. So what do I do now? Do I keep writing books like this? Not necessarily about myself, but other subjects, without footnotes. Maybe even fiction. Or do I pursue my scholarly books, which I love to write, by the way. Right now, my large project is on miracles in the 16th and 17th century, especially the miracle of levitation, people who float or fly. It does happen. What do I do? It's a hard choice to make. I never get a crowd this big for my scholarly, unless I'm at a scholarly conference, then perhaps. So, we all have difficult choices to make in life. We have to go with what we know is, in our own mind and heart, perhaps the right thing to do. And often it has to do with doing for others rather than for yourself. My scholarship is a wonderful thing. It moves knowledge forward. It reaches very few people. It reaches the right people, but they're very few in number. The other work reaches a broader audience. My dilemma was brought home to me. I'll end up with this anecdote. At a scholarly conference in France, Paris, I gave a paper on a topic that I'm sure would interest each and every one of you. You're going to run out from this hall and go look up that article, because the topic is so interesting. The translation of devotional texts from Latin to other European languages in the 15th and 16th century. Yes, you're going to run out. I gave my paper, I thought it was a very good paper. I'm feeling pretty good about that. And we're having dinner. Suddenly the conversation stops because someone had mentioned that, Carlos over there, who won some prize in the U.S. for his book. Conversation stops. That's a conversation stopper. People don't know what book. They all say, what book? We've never heard about this book. This is not a scholarly book. So I explained what the book is, and the man sitting directly across from me, with a pained look on his face, even let out a little, Same sound one of my customers made when I was a newspaper boy and threw the paper on the porch and hit him in the chest. You know what this means, don't you? You know what this means? And then he points like this. You can be remembered for that, not for your scholarship. And I said, I can live with that. No problem. The French historian who had organized the conference put it all in perspective for me, as only a French historian can. He got right to the point. He said, well, you certainly won't win a prize for the paper you gave us today. Guess which is the only scholarly work I have ever been thanked for? That paper. Something spilled over. So, I let God decide what I'm going to do next. He wants to make me crazy. I went crazy when I wrote this book too, but in a much more focused way. But I let God decide when I can start one of these projects and go with that. But I'd like to encourage all of you to learn how to die well. Learn how to die well, and that means the flip side is the more important side. Learn how to be reborn well, because life is full of these moments. A young audience will never laugh when I say this. An older audience, everyone laughs. You know, when you get married, you die. And once I had a member of the audience who raised his hand and says, yeah, sometimes 3 times. So, I'll leave it at that, and I'll open it up for questions. Yes.
So candid with your criticism of the administration and the original has had any pejorative hits put on you personally. I hope often what we would have threatened.
No, I've never been threatened. The question is, you know, what kind of negative feedback have I gotten from Cuban authorities for what I've said in public? The State Department informed me shortly after I won the award that I was on the enemies list in Cuba. I've been formally declared an enemy of the state. And now all my books were banned in Cuba. Even the ones on 16th century Spain or 16th century Germany, they're banned too. I'm a bad person. They've sent, I think they have sent a couple of really stupid agents my way. And also via email. I had a Cuban guy living in Stockholm, Sweden, started emailing me these long emails telling me his whole life story. And after 3 emails, he asked me for recent photos of my children. Then there was a guy who came here to New Haven. This is my favorite. He said, yeah, I read your book, I loved it. And we meet for lunch. So there we are having lunch at the Yorkside. And he says, I've been talking to God. And God has revealed to me how Cuba can become free again. I said, oh, really? He said, and here's the plan. God told me that the only way Cuba can become free is if you go back there and get thrown into prison. Then things will start to. I said, yes, thank you. And I said, you know, in the Catholic tradition, anytime somebody claims they've spoken to God, they have to go through something called the Inquisition. And yes, and they have to kind of, you know, very carefully determine whether this person has been, because some people do talk to God, and God does talk to some people, but you have to be careful to validate the message. And they harass me in other ways. When I'm on radio shows, for instance, I have a caller call in and call me a liar and all sorts of things like that, but nothing threatening. Nothing threatening. Yes. Oh, certainly. The question is there any hope for Cuba? Certainly, but it's going to be very difficult to change. Very difficult because 52 years of a totalitarian regime. In Cuba now, 99% of the population is poor. In Cuba, there is no middle class. You're either very, very rich and well off, people who run the country, or you're poor. In Cuba, everyone earns exactly the same, no matter what you do or how hard you work. Everyone earns $20 a month, less than $20, no matter what you do. Doctors and some professionals make more. They make about $36. And everyone's poor. The infrastructure is totally destroyed. About 60% of the land is no longer being used for farming. It's just lying there. And worse than that, there's been thought control and mind control for 52 years. So it's going to be hard to change. There's hope. I think there's hope. There are also 2 million of us in exile. And if there's any hope, real hope, it's in a transition in which those of us who have left and know how democracy works and actually have some money to invest in it. Yes?
As a writer, how do you feel when you see your books on the shelves and you walk in bookstores and you see your book and you see people reading? How do you feel?
It feels really good. It feels really good. I'll tell you what feels really strange. Someone came over to my house, one of my wife's friends came over. She had her Kindle. She had my book on Kindle, and then she pressed the voice function, and they've got this computer voice, and I thought Stephen Hawking was reading my book. It's my words with that Stephen Hawking computer voice. That was really. But it's wonderful when people email you and say, I read your book, I loved it. I've only gotten 4 negative pieces of mail. I've gotten thousands, but only 4 were negative. And 3 were negative because I used bad words. The other one was just somebody who was just totally out of it. But I also happened somewhere along the way to pick up a stalker who made my life miserable for quite some time. Yes?
Hi. In the process of learning to die, you talked about learning to kind of give yourselves and for others. And in that process, how did the process of forgiveness come into that in terms of what you've been through?
Yeah, that's a very good question. If you didn't hear it, the question is, where did forgiveness come into the process of learning to die? And it's very good. It's key. It's key to let go of your grudges and of the resentment that you feel and of wishing those who have done you evil harm. Right? That's true forgiveness, saying, I hope you have a wonderful life. However, what I have learned is that there are 2 things I've learned. One is, you can forgive, but you certainly never forget. The saying, forgive and forget? No, you don't ever forget, and you can't forget. And the second thing I've learned is that, if it's an injustice that involves many people, not just yourself, it is actually wrong to keep silent about it. If a great evil or injustice has been committed against a number of people, especially an entire country or an entire people, it is wrong to keep silent. It is wrong not to bear witness. As Elie Wiesel has said, and my colleague Eire Miroslav Wolf has also pointed out, when a great injustice takes place and people keep silent, those who keep silent are complicit in this injustice. You have to speak up. Yes, you can forgive. You can say to these people who have done terrible things, well, how about this? I'll heap hot oil on your head. I hope you have a good life. But you can't ever forget, and the world should never forget when wrong is done. Yes?
I was wondering if you're familiar with the ladies in white.
Yes.
And I remember that in a Wall Street Journal at the end of August, there was an article about them. And they are protesting, these women very bravely and very courageously protesting. That's the problem.
Yeah. The question is about these women in Cuba right now, damas de blanco, ladies in white. They were initially the wives, mothers, sisters, daughters of political prisoners. Every Sunday, you have to keep in mind, free speech is illegal in Cuba. Item number 1. Freedom of expression doesn't exist there. Every Sunday, they go to church, even the ones that aren't Christian. They go to church, and after Mass, they march down the street, dressed in white, without saying a word. It's grown. It's grown. Spread to other parts of the island. For the last 2 months, especially, these women have been under constant attack. They're brutally attacked and beaten and dragged down the street, and in several cases have been stripped naked on the street by thugs that are hired by the state security. The world is watching, however, and these women are starting to get somewhere, but they really are stymied in the way the same people in Syria are stymied. It's a brutal, repressive government that doesn't allow free expression. And it's hard. It's very hard for them. But they're getting somewhere. And I think it's very, very important that these are women. These are women who are carrying the torch. There are no men in white. It's the women in white. No questions.
Please, a large round of applause to thank our speaker. Doctor has kindly agreed, as I said before, he's willing to sign copies of his book. So if you have the copy that you read,